business, we want to use the right terminology as much as possible. And also, I want to talk about all the different ways ethics can affect business. So we're going to go over some ethical and corporate social responsibility terminology. And hopefully by the end of this, you know all the different aspects of CSR that could impact business and be able to compose your own opinion as to whether or not you think this is a laudable goal for business or whether business should focus on profit. So why? Well, Facebook got involved in what's called the Cambridge Analytica scandal, and a personality quiz was distributed in 2016, and people filled it out, and it was used to inform the Donald Trump presidential campaign and send people targeted advertisements. But it also mined the personal data of all of their friends. So if your friend filled it out, your data was sent to Cambridge Analytica, and you started receiving some of these targeted advertisements. And this may have been linked to the misinformation that was spread in the 2016 US presidential election. So between 50 million and 87 million users were affected. Here's a photo of Mark Zuckerberg at a hearing explaining his actions and explaining the actions of Facebook. You know, how did this came to be? How did their privacy policy allow for so much information to be shared? So this came to light in 2018. Well, here's the Facebook stock price in 2018. A little blip when the rumors first came to light, a big drop when people became outraged. So it ultimately they rebounded, but for that 1 year, 2018, it definitely hurt their stock price. So people are concerned about how businesses act in the ethical realm. So I want to talk about conflict of interest. I have a special screencast about this, but just understand this is when a person is in a position to personally gain from their actions made in their official capacity. So let's take a CEO. CEO receives stock bonuses, stock options if the company does well. So they might be tempted to pump up that stock price to really maximize the stock price for the fiscal year to get that bonus. However, in doing so, they could jeopardize the long-term business prospects of the company. For example, Sunbeam would make different types of barbecues. What the CEO wanted to do was to, at the end of September, instead of putting the barbecues in storage for future years, liquidate them at whatever price they could get to bump up the bottom line for that year so that they could maximize their bonus and that they got from the stock price. So, that's an example of a business conflict of interest. And here we have, the health inspector. They're supposed to give a objective review of Antonio's Pizza, but then Antonio's giving them a big dinner. So, are they going to rate Antonio highly because he does have a clean restaurant, or because he gave them a dinner? So, B Corp. That's a new trend. Some companies will say, well, we are a B Corp company, and they've agreed to follow certain social responsibility principles, and you can get up to 200 points on a scale, how you treat your people, paying them equitably, having a supply chain that's responsible, that reduces the ecological footprint, and practicing sustainability. And there are about 98 B Corps in Canada as of now, but definitely because it's a trend, people use it as a differentiation, a unique selling proposition. There should be more and more B Corps in the future. And so someone uses the term B Corp, it means that they have a focus on sustainability. Well, you might hear about an embezzlement, white-collar crime. So it's not an armed robbery, it's not a burglary. Nevertheless, money is stolen, and usually it's stolen secretly by falsifying records. An example would be that the general manager of the Montreal Alouettes football team was fired for falsifying records about the salary cap, paying players under the table, and then taking personal trips on the team's budget and claiming it was a business expense. You might see someone falsifying records, diverting company money into their own account, creating the shell company to partner with the company as a way to funnel the money to them. So embezzlement is going to be a type of theft, usually using some type of falsified records to cover it up. Well, securities fraud is legally trading stocks. So, for example, insider trading is when somebody who's a company insider, somebody who knows special information about that company because they work there or they're a board of directors, they use that information to trade the stock before it is known. So, and to take advantage of their insider knowledge. For the market to work well, everyone's supposed to have equal information. So, when a company realizes that a material change in their position has occurred, they should announce it after trading on a day. They should have a press conference. They should announce it. But insider trading would be when a company insider trades before the information is publicly known. And so another type of example is what's called pump and dump. If you saw the movie The Wolf of Wall Street, they are pushing companies of dubious value on the investors. They're talking it up like it's the next big thing, but it's really a penny stock that's not worth the paper it's printed on. So a character, a person, James Farinello, was sentenced to 25 months in prison for creating a company called Pazoo Inc. That did nothing. It had no legitimate business operations, but he tried to sell the shares to his clients, and that was another type of security fraud. So it's also known as white-collar crime because the people who tend to commit security fraud are executives, traders, people who are in a position of power in the corporate company. Here is an example of Enron falsifying records to make the company appear more profitable and successful.
In 1987, two oil traders made bets for Enron on whether the price of oil would rise or fall. Oil trading is like gambling. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. But Enron Oil always seemed to win, much to Ken Lay's delight.
I tried to explain to Ken Lay the tremendous risk that you have in that market. You can lose 10 times your original investment.
A veteran trader, Mike Muckleroy, was suspicious of Enron Oil's steady, high profits.
Well, this oil trading business had profits that nobody could really understand, and in fact that many of Ken Lay's lieutenants questioned. They said this business can't be making this much money legitimately. Something weird is going on.
Something weird was going on. The first hint came from an anonymous tip about the president of the company, Louis Bourget.
Bourget had taken some $3+ million of corporate funds and put it in a personal account of his.
There were offshore accounts, phony books, and a trail that led from the company's treasurer, Tom Mastroeni, to a mysterious Lebanese speculator no one could find, M. Yass.
What name did you suspect that was?
My ass, and M. Smart. I said, that's Maxwell Smart. I mean, these guys are playing games.
Bourget and Mastroeni were summoned to Houston. First, they presented falsified bank records to Enron. Then they admitted they had diverted company profits to personal accounts.
It was brought to the attention of the Enron board. Auditors were brought in as well to look at the whole thing.
At the board meeting, the auditors told Lay that Bourget and his traders were manipulating earnings destroying daily trading records and probably gambling way beyond their limits.
The next day, we found out that Lay's decision was to basically change nothing as far as the operation's concerned, and the reason he gave was that this was the only part of the combined company that was making any money, and that he could not, kill the golden goose.
The traders weren't fired or even disciplined. Instead, Enron sent a telex to Bourget. Please keep making us millions. Instead of reducing Enron's risk, Lay encouraged his traders to gamble more. But then, their luck changed.
2 months later, I got this panic call that they had drawn down $90 million in the previous 5 days. What we could do is just try to find out what kind of gorilla we had loose up there.
McElroy hopped on the next plane to New York. He knew Mastroeni had another set of books, and he would do whatever it took to get them.
I basically stood over Tom and I told him one of two things was going to happen. Either one of the trading partners that was crooked with Bourget, who was a German arms dealer, was going to kill him, or I was. I said, I'll track you down and find you no matter where you go, and sooner or later I'll get you.
The next day, Mastroeni came in with the real books. The traders had gambled away all of Enron's reserves. By acting fast, McElroy bluffed the market and managed to save the company. After Valhalla, Ken Lay maintained that he had been shocked that the traders had gambled so recklessly, but Ken Lay had known all along about the risks that were taken. He had seen the reports warning him about the traders' behavior.
Since the fall of Enron, Ken Lay has said he can't be responsible for things he didn't know about. Sounds like what he said about Valhalla. Do you believe that he didn't know?
I can answer only for one. I can answer for Valhalla because Ken Lay did in fact know about this thing because I had told him myself.
The auditors adamantly told Mr. Ken Lay that the 2 rogue traders should be fired. Lay read the report and he read his budget and estimated how much the 2 rogue executives, made, and if they were fired, what he could lose. My conclusion was that this guy is a guy who puts earnings before scruples rather than reacting to the dishonesty right in front of him.
Mastroeni received a suspended sentence. Bourget was convicted of fraud and spent 1 year in jail. With his biggest moneymaker now behind bars, Ken Lay had a problem. Who could he find to make money for Enron? In 1987,
So the idea with Enron, biggest financial scandal ever, they falsified a lot of their, speculative trading in the footnotes of financial statements. It was so impassable to read. It was so complicated. There were so many transactions. You couldn't really read the financial statements and understand the financial position of the company. And they were repeatedly told that they were taking risky positions and people were lying, and they never took action because it would interfere with the price of the stock. So we could have defective products where products do not work as advertised or live up to their warranty. Sometimes a recent example would be Samsung. Their battery would spontaneously combust. Here's a photo of a phone that would combust as someone was talking on it. So obviously that'd be shocking. A product bursting into flames is not good, especially an expensive product. And you can even get, it's not necessarily as dramatic as a fire, but Apple had to pay money because they would purposely shorten the life of batteries and, use so that people would upgrade their phones sooner. Well, we could have environmental damage when a business harms the environment. And an externality is like an external cost. And a weakness of our system is we tend not to price these externalities correctly. Like if the business spent a little bit of money on insurance in case there was a big ecological disaster, then when it came time to clean it up every few years, the cost would have been paid for. But we tend to assume that everything's going to work well, and then when the big extraordinary black swan event occurs, the government is left cleaning it up. So, you know, the also sometimes the just scale of the environmental damage is totally unfathomable. Now, you may see in developing countries, by the clothing plant, occasionally the river changes color depending on what dyes they're using, and people in those areas tend not to, pay much attention to it when the dye, is red and the river is red one day. But a big example would be in 2010, there was a massive oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico that affected several states. The rig was operated by British Petroleum, caused massive damage, and they were faced with a $21 billion fine for the cleanup. And unfortunately, sometimes, like with the Lac Mégantic incident, which caused tremendous loss of life as well, the company tends to go bankrupt and is unable to pay to clean up their own environmental damage. And it can also just be something, there's a Nestle, an international company, buys water at a really cheap rate from a local well, and there's no limit on how much they can draw out. So is it really a good idea to sell local water to a foreign company at a cheap rate, which they then bottle and sell at a profit? These are the types of ethical issues. There's not a right or a wrong answer to it, but you want to think of all sides of the issue.
Permit for this Nestle Waters Canada facility in southwest Ontario expired nearly a month ago. The fact that it's continuing to draw water from a local well is angering area environmentalists.
There's problems, and we've been in a drought condition, so we don't believe that permit should be operating as business as usual.
Nestle says it's reduced its outtake by 20% because of the drought conditions. And when it comes to its expired permit, it's still in line with the law. Ontario's Water Resources Act allows a company to keep running under its old permit until a decision on a new one is made. The only catch is that the application for the new permit must be made at least 90 days before the old one expires.
We are, as I said, operating legally. We are doing everything we can. We are monitoring the groundwater elevation, surface water elevation points, and our current permit stays in effect until a new permit is issued.
But especially when there's evidence.
But activist Mike Nagy says that's not good enough. He's calling on the province to change the law.
That water's gone forever. You're removing it from the ecosystem every day, all the time, as well as imposing, hundreds of millions of packages of plastic on the earth.
The head of Ontario's independent environmental watchdog is also criticizing the government. She says it isn't doing enough to consult the public when it comes to issuing new permits.
We obviously have concerns about this process of the ministry making decisions taking a very long time.
She also says the province isn't charging companies enough for water extraction.
It makes no sense to be giving away our most precious resource for little or nothing.
The Aberfoyle facility is currently allowed to take up to 3.6 million liters of water per day. The province says it will post a description of the application for a new permit online for a public review, but it's so far not said when that will happen. Ellen Morrow, CBC News, Aberfoyle.
Not necessarily an active environmental damage such as an oil spill or air pollution, but again depleting a resource and sort of obfuscating what's happening by not making the permit process public. And also, when the permit expires, all you need to do is apply for a new one and then there can be a long delay before a new permit is issued, and they can continue operating. And again, so what is the externality of depleting the Aberfoyle resource? I don't know whether that's been properly calculated, and so it's a question about whether or not this is appropriate to let an international company buy such cheap water. Well, it's another type of issue, harassment. Just a supervisor could demean, intimidate, or threaten employee. So someone who makes a comment about women's appearance, sexist jokes. We would usually say this is more than one occasion. That the first time someone would be spoken to and told that it was inappropriate, and then afterwards the action would be taken. So what action should you take if you feel that you're being taken advantage of? Well, you can go to human resources. That would be the good first step, and then also to document what's happening in case it becomes a legal issue. So the attitude towards that has changed a lot in recent years. It's no longer considered, just, the boys will be boys, or, you can't tough it up, what's the matter with you? People are a lot more accepting that harassment's an issue. Not to say that it's been totally eliminated. Certain fields have had, big problems. Technology is still dealing with that culture of, the very, very, aggressive masculine culture that where women are underrepresented, and there's a lot of harassing behavior. So the glass ceiling is the name of an imaginary barrier that stops women and people of color from advancing beyond a certain point. So it's a glass ceiling because it's invisible. So people might be moving up the ladder. They can become supervisors, middle managers, but then when it comes to becoming EVPs, executive vice presidents, C-level employees, these minorities and these women tend to be underrepresented, and that would be called the glass ceiling. So for example, in terms of becoming a partner at a law firm, 21% of the law firm partners are women. Now, these days in Ontario, more than 50% of law school grads are women. So that's a bit of a glass ceiling. It should be 50, close to 50-50, or at least in a few years it becomes 50-50. And then if we want to talk about the leaders, the managing partners, the senior partners, only 12% of them are women. So again, it's like this, it's unspoken, but it's this glass ceiling that prevents women from advancing as fast as men or as high as men. Fair trade is an issue, and so especially with international business, the company might deal with a country with no regulation. So there could be minimum, compensation given to the farmers who grow coffee, or there could be, sweatshop conditions. So fair trade is when you pay higher prices for ethically sourced products. So it costs more. Fair trade clothing is going to cost more than fast fashion clothing, but you would know that the workers do not have to work in sweatshop conditions. Fairphone is an ethically sourced product. So some minerals in a smartphone, they come from conflict areas. They're being used to fund wars in parts of equatorial Africa where the minerals are grown. So if you buy a Fairphone, you know that there's no sweatshops, that the miners have been paid a living wage. Tax evasion and tax avoidance are pressing issues. So tax evasion is when you don't pay your taxes. A subset of that is tax avoidance, where companies try to pay as little as possible, and like Amazon not paying any taxes, taking advantage of loopholes, moving their operations to jurisdictions with lower taxes. if it becomes actual tax evasion where legitimate taxes are not paid, then it's a legal issue. But there's just the overall issue of should corporations be minimizing the taxes they pay, and not paying what some might say is their fair share. I don't know what that fair share is, but we're in the ethical unit, so we want to consider how a business impacts the rest of society. So Apple was funneling sales through an office in Ireland. So all of their European sales, they funneled through Ireland as if they had taken place in Ireland, because Ireland had the lowest tax rate. But these actually were sales that had taken place in continental Europe. So they had to pay $1 billion fine for tax evasion. There's sometimes a duty to report. And for example, teachers, have a duty to report suspect child abuse, or if you're in a position of authority and you think that a minor is at risk, you have to report that. Workers have a duty to report hazardous working conditions to their supervisor. So, if you're working at a summer job and you see that a piece of equipment isn't working correctly, you should be reporting that. Or if it's too hot because of the summer, you should be reporting that. You don't just want to ignore it and say, oh, that's someone else's problem. You want to report it. It's also the idea of a whistleblower, where letting people know of a situation. Obviously, if you're not working for the company, you wouldn't know. So a whistleblower, for example, the TTC union wanted to blow the whistle on unqualified workers jeopardizing the safety of others and causing accidents.
The union that represents TTC employees is raising safety concerns for their members. This after they say one of their workers was seriously injured after he was hit by a bus that was driven by a contract employee right here at the TTC garage in North York. And they say proper protocol wasn't followed. The union is also raising questions on the hiring of unqualified contract employees, saying that it's jeopardizing the safety of its members. The incident, confirmed by the TTC, saw the bus driven by a contracted service line cleaner at the Wilson Yard on the night of August 15th, and the employee was treated in hospital. These photos have been released by the union showing the employee, who's been with the TTC for 30 years, bruised up. Local 113 says the contract worker was traveling well above the 7-kilometer-an-hour speed limit while at the facility, and proper protocol wasn't followed. The union also says this is part of a troubling pattern, and the lack of training qualifications for contract employees is jeopardizing the safety of its workers.
They're hiring unqualified, untrained, and in many cases, just inept people. And those people are putting our workers at risk. We're frustrated, and I don't know what's going to happen if another incident takes place, or what's going to happen at the next general membership meeting, because people are very upset and are afraid that people are driving buses, speeding with buses, not following procedures. So as far as we're concerned, we're being treated like a second-class citizen, and our health and welfare are not the priority of the TTC.
The TTC says it's taking this incident seriously, and the safety is the cornerstone of all their operations. A spokesperson tells City News in a statement, prior to operating a TTC vehicle, they are evaluated to ensure they have the required qualification skill and are competent to drive a city transit bus. They do not receive the same level of training as an operator, as the requirements of these jobs are very different. The contract requires these workers are fit for duty at all times. This is consistent with the requirements of our operators. Now, the TTC spokesperson also says that the incident is still under review by the Ministry of Labor and the contractor. Meanwhile, the union tells us the employee is currently off work.
to make reasonable accommodations for an illness or disability, to perhaps modify the duties. For example, if someone can be working in an office instead of doing physical labor while they are injured, or if there's a disability, to have them work near the door in a space that's appropriate for them. Businesses have to offer accommodations for stress leave, for those with mental health issues, and modify the workstations, but only what's reasonable. Eventually, if the person cannot return to duty, then you can, for example, the federal government, you do have to offer leave, but if they cannot return to duty within a reasonable time, then you can fill the position, but you are also required to sort of modify the workstation for employees with disabilities. That would be the ideal. However, we do know in the real world sometimes these accommodations are not made. Cause marketing is another trend. You might see a company partner with a charity to do something that's altruistic. It's targeted towards the younger demographic, and it's promoting a product that benefits society, promoting the benefits to society and the benefits of the product simultaneously. This is an interesting one that I saw. It was Tito's Handmade Vodka partnered with Emancipet, and they are positioning themselves as vodka for dog people. And you can know that when you buy Tito's Handmade Vodka, you are supporting animal shelters. I don't really know whether this moves the needle, but it's an example of cause marketing. Again, we have primary stakeholders. We've covered those before. So, primary stakeholders have a financial connection to the company, including employees, customers, suppliers, the owners, the government, the competition. These are all financially affected by the moves a business makes. And there are also secondary stakeholders who are affected by the issue but not connected. The community is affected, the members of the media, the educational institutions in the community are affected by the employment conditions in the surrounding area. Special interest groups, political parties are also concerned, but they're not financially connected. So as a closing thought, you might want to ponder, do businesses have a responsibility to solely make a profit, or should they be contributing as well to the community? There's no right or wrong answer, but you just want to understand this. And as that Facebook Cambridge Analytica story shows, sometimes these issues, whether it's embezzlement, environmental damage, harassment, comes back to affect the overall stock price and